Today on Earth Focus, Canada's rush for gold. Human Rights Watch exposes the brutal side of Canadian gold mining in Papua New Guinea. In British Columbia, the Chilcotin people take on the mining industry to save their ancestral land. Coming up on Earth Focus. Gold has been a symbol of power and influence for civilizations for thousands of years. It has been associated with gods, immortality, and wealth. And the pursuit of gold has shaped history, from the Spanish conquest of South America to the gold rush in the American and Canadian West. Little else has had such power to inspire or to corrupt. Over the years, gold mining became industrialized. Today, most mining is done by big corporations. And of the world's 4 largest companies, 2, Barrick Gold and Goldcorp, are Canadian.
% of Canada's GDP is mining-based.
To date, there's been a handful of attempts to hold Canadian companies to account.
Mining is often considered in the text of laws and policy documents to be the highest and best suited purpose for land.
Because the gold prices are high, they're trying to get the gold out of the ground as quickly as possible to benefit from those high gold prices. This means that they're rushing.
It really is a David and Goliath struggle.
The reach of Canadian gold mining is international. The Pogera Mine in Papua New Guinea is one of the world's top 10 producing gold mines. It is 95% owned and operated by Toronto-based Barrick Gold. In February 2011, a Human Rights Watch report identified failures by Barrick Gold to recognize and respond to allegations of abuse and for failures to address mining-related health and environmental concerns.
Papua New Guinea is an incredibly beautiful country. It's got beautiful beaches along the shoreline, and then up in the highlands are just these stunning mountain landscapes, valleys, rainforests, much of it very sparsely populated. Natural resources really form the backbone of the economy, especially mining, timber, and oil. And now an enormous liquid natural gas project that's being headed up by ExxonMobil.
Up until a couple of decades ago, this area was incredibly isolated. But with the discovery of the Porgera gold deposit, the place has become home to one of the world's most successful gold mines.
Papua New Guinea is probably one of the best examples of the really cruel ironies that often go hand in hand with these big extractive industries. They're supposed to lead to development, to uplifting people from poverty, and yet paradoxically, things only seem to get worse. Barrick has its private security force at Porgera basically because there aren't anywhere near enough police there to do the job. The permanent police presence stationed in the nearby town of Payam is usually only 16 or 17 officers who often don't even possess a car that works.
We're on the road to Porgera, where we've been investigating a range of human rights abuses, including a series of brutal alleged gang rapes carried out by the mine security guards.
driver ada balbang perempena sikiri or pera kamar kadi na menim mina bona bo rebim lem sum nenke ba butim lem da rongeda ne leben bla rongora.
Some of the women we interviewed said that when they were arrested by security guards at the mine, the guards gave them a choice. Either they could go to prison and either face jail time or a hefty fine, or they could submit to being raped by all of the men who had arrested them. None of the women we interviewed reported the crimes, and in many cases the security guards told them that if they went to the police, they would then be arrested because they had been engaging in illegal activity.
I think it's really important for people to understand that Barrick has been made aware of these issues for years before the company finally did start taking some action. So people from Porgera, from the local community, have been coming to Barrick's annual general meetings for years and been speaking at the annual general meeting, speaking directly to the board of directors, to the chairman, and to all of the shareholders, and have been mentioning both the violence by the security guards in terms of alleged killings and the alleged rapes. So Barrick was certainly aware of this because this was the whole board of directors that was being told about these issues. In addition to that, Harvard University and New York University had been contacting Barrick and telling them about the findings that they were finding in the interviews that they were doing, also again for years. And yet Barrick denied quite publicly that there was any issue with violence associated with their security guards until just before a Human Rights Watch report was about to come out. And I think that was sort of a tipping point where the company realized that they couldn't just keep denying these issues forever.
We're hiking up to the point where the mine discharges all of its tailings, its liquid waste from the mine, to film some people who actually stand in the flow of the tailings to pan for gold. Going onto the dump is trespassing, both for us and for the people who live and work around here.
Almost all of the victims of the worst abuses that we documented were illegal miners. People who trespass onto the mine site, go onto the waste dumps, and try and eke out a living by finding pieces of rock that the mine has discarded.
A lot of the people that we interviewed were arrested working right around this point, actually standing in the flow of the tailings from the mine, panning for gold.
There are a lot of children working as illegal miners on the waste dumps, including a lot of very young children. Those children, by and large, aren't going to school, and they're also working in a very dangerous profession.
It's kind of crazy. Yesterday I was sitting in the mine manager's office. Today we're getting chased away by the security. If people are arrested down there, they'll be taken to court, tried for illegal mining, and they can be sentenced to very high fines, higher than most people here can pay, and a fairly lengthy prison term if they don't pay.
A lot of the land around Porgera was leased by the company so that they could open this mine. The company compensated the landowners for that land, but the fact remains that there's a lot less land there than there used to be. The waste dumps themselves have consumed huge tracts of what used to be farming land, and the waste dumps are continually growing with every truck full of rock that's dumped onto them.
So I first visited the Pogera mine in 2000 and was absolutely stunned at the environmental impacts. I actually flew over the mine in a helicopter. The mine is dumping some 6 million tons of tailings and some 12 million tons of waste rock into a local river system, and it's an 800-kilometer long river system that goes all the way from the highlands of Papua New Guinea down to the coast. What people also need to understand is that the worst contamination is clearly at the upper reaches, where there hasn't been a lot of other little streams that have fed into this river system to dilute the contamination. But the mining company has a mixing zone that's 160 kilometers long. And in this mixing zone, the waste doesn't have to meet even Papua New Guinea standards for metal contamination. So it isn't until after 160 kilometers downstream that the effluent and the waste from this mine is supposed to meet metal levels that the Papua New Guinea government sets. But that means that all the people who live along this river for 160 kilometers are essentially exposed to metal levels that are higher than even the Papua New Guinea government would allow.
The Porgera mine disposes of all of its tailings, which is liquid waste made up mostly of heavy metals that are a byproduct of processing ore directly into the Porgera River. The mine discharges about 6 million tons of these tailings every year. This is an extremely controversial practice. One thing we heard time and time again from people was that because they had no land that they could use to farm on, they had no choice but to go down onto those waste dumps and illegally mine.
My house is there.
Your house is there?
My garden is damp.
Okay.
And I got no garden, no water, no plywood.
People don't want to be living there anymore. They recognize how hazardous it is, and they don't think it's fit for human habitation, and they want to be moved. So this is quite unusual. We often find that people don't want to be resettled for a mine, but here they're saying that the mine is already there, the problems are there, and the best solution would be for them to be moved away. At every mine, there are what we call winners and losers, and the winners are certainly the people who manage to get a job at a mine. In this case, that's really a very small portion of the community that's around the mine.
What will happen is that they'll combine mercury with the crushed rock in the water. The mercury will stick to the gold that's in the pan, and they'll be able to separate that. They can see the mercury easier than they can see the gold. They'll boil that mercury over an open flame, which is particularly dangerous because of the mercury vapors, and what remains will be pure gold.
Inhaling mercury is incredibly dangerous, and people all over Porgera are on a daily basis burning mercury off inside their homes, often over the same fires they cook over. Illegal miners around Porgera can buy vials of mercury from shops all over town. It's easy to find, and it's cheap enough that people can afford it.
Well, today we have dozens of cases of mercury poisoning. They become drowsy, they are out of touch, and they stare blankly on the wall. You cannot talk to them. They are not conversant. Nothing. They're like zombies.
Barrick has chosen to operate in a country whose government ignores a lot of its most basic human rights obligations. But that doesn't mean a Canadian multinational company should do the same.
The problem is that there are no international regulations for the operations of multinational mining companies, and also no binding standards. So multinational mining companies are supposed to follow the regulations of the country in which they're operating. However, many of these multinational mining companies are operating in weak governance zones, which means that either the regulations are weak or their enforcement is weak. And Canada certainly sets no binding regulations for the operations of our mining companies operating overseas.
Some 75% of the world's major mining and exploration companies are Canadian. But the Canadian government, unfortunately, does virtually nothing to regulate the conduct of big Canadian companies operating overseas. We're not trying to pass a verdict on the mining industry. What we're doing is we're looking at this mine and trying to determine whether or not the company and the government are living up to their own core human rights obligations. If this mine is going to be open, is the company operating it in a responsible way that ensures that people's human rights are protected? And the answer to that question until now has been no.
The Pogera experience shows what can go wrong when Canada undertakes large-scale gold mining overseas. But at home, Canada's domestic gold mining experience is also controversial and raises similar issues of human rights, health, and environmental degradation. In Canada, more than 1,000 First Nations communities live near mineral deposits and mines. They have had little say about mining on or near their ancestral lands, and they've benefited little from it. But that's changing. Canada's First Nations people are increasingly recognizing their rights to land and title. And in British Columbia, they are taking on the mining industry to save their land.
Everything you need, you can get right here in this small valley.
This has always been a part of who we are.
This water, all the plants, all the wildlife, all the air that we breathe in are very sacred to us.
You know, if the world found out that Canada was actually doing this, I think they would be surprised.
Our people will eventually start losing their identity of who they are, what they are, and our way of life is going to be totally different.
The Chilcotin have lived in British Columbia as long as anyone can remember. The heart of their country is the Chilcotin River, its tributaries, lakes, and streams. They have fought to protect it ever since the European settlers came here. Now the Chilcotin Nation is fighting a new battle. The claimed land sits on one of Canada's largest mineral deposits, and Taseko Mines Ltd, a local mining company, wants to tap it.
The project does go back into the 70s and 80s, and in particular in the 90s, when the mining company tried to get it approved. And it was basically shut out by the Department of Fisheries and Oceans. And they looked at the project and looked at the impacts of the project and really were not interested in allowing the project to go forward. Time went on, gold prices increased, political climates changed in both British Columbia and Canada, and the company, which had never given up on the project, tried again. And the project was problematic in large part because in order to construct the mine, they were going to drain a very highly productive lake, which was full of rainbow trout, impact streams in another lake, which are part of the greater ecosystem there. And the taking of a diverse and productive lake ecosystem for a 20-year mine was very controversial, both for the government and especially for the people whose traditional territory it is, the Tsilhqot'in people.
Independent Canadian filmmaker Susan Smitten and her team made Blue Gold, a film about the Chilcotin effort to save Fish Lake. Their aim, to help present the Chilcotin case to a federal environmental review panel.
Making this film was something that was, in fact, one of the hugest privileges of my filmmaking career, but it was obvious that a film needed to be made. There needs to be a film shot in a way that they're comfortable, where they can tell the story of what's at stake, because only by hearing their story, only by understanding from them what really is at stake, could people empathize, could people connect, and could we perhaps get the change that was needed? People at first couldn't believe it, and then when they heard about it, they would say, well, this isn't going to be allowed to happen. But the truth was that Taseko Mines had a lot more money. The resources they were putting into this were immense because there was a lot at stake. So a small grassroots organization dug deep, and just worked at it bit by bit. And finally, the message started getting through to Canadians across Canada. So the money started to flow in so that the Chilcotin could afford to put forward the best case possible, and based on the best science and the best facts that were available, they were able to prove that the plan as presented by Taseko Mines was not viable and was in fact ecologically permanently destructive.
From an environmental perspective, this is a very problematic mine. It's in an area full of lakes and wetlands. It's perched on fractured bedrock above other lakes and very important salmon rivers and salmon streams. The ore body itself is full of cadmium and mercury. Again, the environmental impact statement from the mining company suggests there's a risk of a cadmium plume extending underneath the waste area out into adjacent water bodies. The waste disposal area itself, the tailings impoundment, would obliterate a smaller but also healthy and productive lake full of rainbow trout called Little Fish Lake. And there are risks to downstream water quality on into the future. We don't really know what the quality of the water when the pit would fill up is. And if there was contamination going downstream, that would put at risk the salmon stocks. The area is also important grizzly bear habitat, and grizzly bears, especially in the southern interior, are a threatened species.
Taseko Mines Ltd could yield 100 million pounds of copper and 235,000 ounces of gold. And that means big bucks for British Columbia, new jobs, and a boost for the economy.
Taseko has emphasized over and over again the economic benefits of this project, which really are the only justification for this project to go ahead. Their arguments fall short on a number of fronts. They haven't really assessed the long-term costs of maintaining the site into the future. They haven't assessed the costs of the risks to the salmon downstream. And some of their economic arguments also are very much based on a high gold price going into the future, on an economy that just continues to grow and grow and grow, that assumes that there will be a big demand for gold in India and China into the future. Those are all assumptions that aren't necessarily guaranteed.
The campaign to save Fish Lake was really a small group of incredibly dedicated people that started with the Chilcotin.
I think if you're going to work with someone starting up any kind of business, you need to consult with them, you need to communicate with them, and it's got to be a partnership between the two, and there's definitely no partnership in this.
I don't see the benefits of destroying our land and our waters and our fish.
They say it'll create jobs and that, but still it's just going to ruin our land, and land's priceless to me. I can't replace it, like after it's been mined.
It's like the death of our people in a way, you know. The way I see it, it's a form of genocide, you know. Some people may not see it that way, but I do.
I don't think there's no such thing as safe environment after this mine. I say 20 years or so you will get your land back. I don't believe it. I don't believe the country will be like this again.
And how does that make you feel?
Sad.
After an environmental review, the Canadian government agreed in November 2010, giving the Taseko mining project a thumbs down. Their action came just after the government of British Columbia had granted a 25-year mining lease to Taseko.
The opposition to this project is so strong that there is inevitably going to be conflict if it gets the authorization from the governments to go ahead. And that kind of conflict is not good for other businesses in British Columbia, other mining projects that want to go ahead. This is going to send a very strong signal to the international community that BC is a place which you may or may not get your mine approved, and that will scare away investment from British Columbia. We were told that this project needs to be approved to do the opposite, to send a strong signal of support for mining in British Columbia and to encourage investment.
In January 2011, Taseko Mines resubmitted its proposal for the new Prosperity Mine project at the same site. The company proposes not to drain Fish Lake and to move the tailing facility to another location. Opponents say Fish Lake would still be affected by toxic waste and die. The federal review process is expected to take a year.
Many of us walked away with the first win on Prosperity, feeling, wow, isn't that great? Now we've been a bit shaken, but it has just shaken our resolve to stay strong. And I feel like in talking with the Chilcotin, they are just ready to hunker down and say, I'm sorry. A second time round doesn't mean it's right and doesn't mean it can go.
We do not want to see Tsilhqot'in be destroyed by the mine.
Now on U.S. airwaves, a global channel of uncompromising stories. World news, documentaries, entertainment, and culture. Link TV, connecting you to the world. For more information, visit linktv.org.